with the immigration crisis. It continues to be one of the most divisive topics in the country. New data from Gallup polling reveals 58% of Republicans say the numbers of those allowed to immigrate to the U.S. should be decreased compared to just 18% of Democrats. Let's turn the clock back, though, about 20 years, all the way back in 2003. 55% of Republicans and 43% of Democrats wanted fewer new immigrants arriving here in the U.S. Pretty similar numbers back then. Let's bring in journalist and media critic Steve Krakauer. He's the author of Uncovered: How the Media Got Cozy with Power, Abandoned Its Principles, and Lost the People. So, Steve, what do you think happened? In our lifetime, Democrats and Republicans had more similar world views not too long ago compared to today, where it seems as though it's like, you know, one end of the spectrum and another end of the spectrum, and nowhere do we come to the middle. What do you think is to blame?
It's a fascinating question, and it's a little bit disturbing because I think we're better off when there's a little bit more gray area where people on the left and the right have points of view that are not so far apart, not so divided. But that in particular is a really interesting one. I think there's a lot of factors. Like the immigration one, it started as a place where, as you show, it was very similar. But the Republican line hasn't changed that much. It's gone from 55 to 58. That's a very, very small shift. In fact, it's basically not a shift at all in the last 20 years. The Democratic line, though, has gone completely off a cliff. And that's one where I have to say the big elephant in the room is Donald Trump and making that such a major campaign message of his, the build the wall and the way he launched with some of the offensive comments he said about Mexicans. I think that's one that ended up shifting the perception by the left to go the other direction as a foil to Trump. Whereas I think a lot of the ones are almost social media based. I worry a lot about the way that we put ourselves in the boxes by the feeds that we curate for ourselves. And that's a way of further dividing ourselves because we're only looking at what we want to look at. And that's really that's a pretty new phenomenon in the last 10, 15 years. And it kind of does match up with poll questions like that.
What I hear you saying, and I think a lot of viewers would agree with, is that we're at a time in our country where one party is overcompensating to balance the extremism of the other. And again, I think a lot of people would say, yeah, exactly. But we've spoken to people here from various political platforms and perspectives, independent, Republican, Democrat. They all agree something needs to change when it comes to immigration. Some kind of reform needs to be put in place, but nobody from either party, either major party, is bringing forth an answer. Are these polls asking the right questions? Is the media asking the right questions?
Yeah, perhaps not. I mean, that's a pretty harsh way of looking at it, right? Do we need less people from other countries to come into our country? That's a pretty black and white question that I think doesn't really get at the nuance to the question. And I think, to your point, that's why places like NewsNation are important, because it's a much more complicated issue than that. And there are lots of questions about legal immigration versus illegal immigration. How do we treat people who cross the border? Do we even call them legal or illegal? I mean, even that is a polarizing question these days. So I think when it gets the really most important issues that actually do affect people on an everyday basis, I would put immigration in that group in ways that maybe other polarizing issues are not. This is something that affects people when it comes to jobs, affects people when it comes to crime and safety. And so it's not just a perception issue. This is a real issue. And yet we're so forced often by, frankly, both sides of the aisle who would rather it be a divisive issue than a nuanced one, rather divide people into their tribes than try to find some common ground.
Well, and nuance is one thing, but solutions are another. And a lot of times this polling just further stokes the flame of division by, again, we're in the world of AI where everything's about what the prompts will be, who the programmers are who decide what the questions are to give us the answers. Our polling systems potentially need to kind of go through an overhaul and think about what are they asking and what's the end goal of those questions.
I think we see this all the time. One of the most important things that I think that the average consumer of news can do is not just read a story about a poll, but actually start to look at the underlying data in the poll and frankly, look at how the question is asked. Because a lot of times that can lead a person or lead a respondent to an answer or away from an answer. And unfortunately, I don't think this is going to change anytime soon, particularly as we ramp up with 2024. Polling is kind of the story that drives the horse race of this election cycle. So I do think it's really imperative for everyone when when it comes to looking at candidates, looking at favorability, or all the different issues that will come about over these next 15 months, to look deeper than just what the stories about the polls say, and look at the polls themselves.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your television provider. Also, don't forget to click that red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.